everybody. Welcome. In today's training, we're going to talk about the anatomy of a decision, the parts of the decision-making process. I'm going to walk you through them very briefly. There is a podcast on this as well, but I want to show you how your brain goes about making a decision so that you can be an active part of the process and it doesn't feel like you're just on default decision-making mode. I know so many times as a school leader, we have so much information coming at us that we're required to make a lot of decisions very quickly on a regular basis. So know that there are times and places where you're going to use this decision-making process a little more in depth than you will for other things. But the more you get used to it, you'll be able to do it more quickly in real time. Okay, so what is a decision? What's the anatomy of a decision? What does it look like? So there are 3 stages of a decision, the decision-making process. There's before the decision, there's in the moment, which is the during, and then there's the after the decision. Pretty simple. Now, before the decision happens, this is what happens when we are faced with a decision. So until we're made aware that we have a decision to make, we don't know, right? So you're going about your business, doing what you do in your day, and then a situation occurs that brings to your awareness a decision needs to be made. One of 2 things are happening. People are presenting you with a situation and they're explicitly asking you to make a decision. If that's the case, your brain is like taking it all in and it's like, wait a minute, do I need to make a decision about this? Like, why do I need to make a decision? So do I need to make the decision? Why do I need to make the decision? Am I the person responsible for making the decision? And if so, how am I going to go about making this decision? So your brain's starting to kind of filter all of that out as somebody proposes a request for you to make a decision. Okay. This part of the process feels like the hardest and it feels like the longest until you get to the other side. Because when you're in it, your brain wants to, it gets involved in all the chatter. It wants to ask all the questions. It needs answers. It needs information. It wants input. It doesn't like the feeling of indecision, right? Your brain, it loves to seek out pleasure, avoid pain, and make things as easy as possible. And making a decision doesn't always feel like pleasure. It feels like pain. It doesn't feel easy. It's uncomfortable. Indecision is uncomfortable for many people. So as soon as you're presented with the request that you need to make a decision, your brain's going to go into that mode. Now, the other way that we make decisions is that people might give us a scenario, a situation, and just based on our interpretation as a leader, we think, oh gosh, now that I know this, now I have to make a decision about how to handle this. How am I going to approach this? What am I going to do? I have to make a decision. And even though nobody asked us specifically to make a decision, sometimes we feel like when we're presented with information that it requires us to make a decision. In that case, I just ask you before you make a decision to consider asking yourself, do I really need to take any action here? Is there a decision I have to make, or can I just take this and listen and hold some space for it right now and consciously decide not to take any action? You can do that too. You might decide, no, you do need to take action, that it's warranted, which is fine, but just be aware that sometimes we get triggered and we just think we have to take action and make decisions when really it's our own brain that's coming up to that conclusion. Okay. So when you're in the before process, it feels like it's the hardest part. You're going to struggle. Like the indecision feels like struggle. And what happens is once you decide like, okay, this is my decision, I do need to make it, I'm being asked to make it, or I see that it's my decision, your brain's going to go into the how, right? This is where all the chatter starts. So, and this is for more difficult decisions, right? There's tons of decisions that you make all day long that you don't have to go through this complex process. But for the big decisions, for the ones that feel challenging, or if you're just feeling like a lot of pressure about a decision you have to make, you can break this decision making process apart and use this anatomy of decision making to help you. So, in the beginning, you're going to do what? Collect a lot of information. There's a lot of chatter going on in your mind. And sometimes it feels cloudy. It gets confusing. It feels overwhelming. The brain wants to shut down and freeze and kind of put things on hold. And that's when you get into indecision. So you might be able to see my notes back here. So there's a process we go through for making decisions, but oftentimes when it's uncomfortable, the brain wants out immediately. So it does one of two things. It either just procrastinates, it avoids, delays, and just puts the decision on hold because it doesn't like the discomfort of figuring out, or it doesn't like the discomfort of like owning that decision, of making it. So it puts it off for a little bit, thinking it's going to feel better at a later point, which never really does. So you're kind of in this like discussion mode inside of yourself, right? And a lot of times what we do is we make pros and cons lists. We get a lot of information. We ask for other people's opinions or input. And what that really does is it clouds us even more, because when our brain's confused enough, and then we ask other people's brains to have input into the decision we have to make. And most of the time that clouds our decision even more, and it feels more overwhelming because now we see the potential outcomes and the impact that the decision will have. So what happens is we kind of stall out and we don't want to make the choice, or we want to rush through it to avoid the discomfort. So this part of this decision-making process, it's really the difference between people who make empowered decisions versus people who don't. And one thing I like to share with people is that there are some tips and strategies to get you through this aspect of the decision-making process. Number one, I think this is the most important thing you can do, is give yourself a defined amount of time to make that decision. So when you're faced with a big decision, you need to give it a time frame. You need to give it a deadline and honor that deadline to make that decision. Because if you don't, it will expand into the amount of time you give it. And by defaulting to procrastination or thinking I'm going to make the decision later, you're really making a decision. Indecision is a decision. And here's what's crazy. People don't like the feeling of having to make a decision, so they avoid putting it off. But what happens is it's in the background of your brain. That open cycle is going. That indecision feels terrible because every time it pops back up into your awareness, you're like, oh, I have to make that decision. And that feels bad. But then we avoid having to make the decision because we think of what's going to happen in the future, and it's going to feel bad in the future. And then guess what? You are trying to avoid future pain, but you're trading it off for current pain by being in indecision. So ask yourself, what decision do you want to make? It's okay to gather some information or, check in with stakeholders if the decision is going to have a high impact on people around you. Yes, but you don't do it to avoid or delay. And you don't do it so that you don't have to feel responsible for the decision. When you say like, well, the teacher said they wanted me to do it this way, so I guess I'm going to make that decision and do it that way. Well, what happens is if the decision doesn't go as planned or hiccups come up, you're going to blame the teachers. You're going to say, well, that's what the teachers wanted. It really wasn't my decision. You see that? It's really easy to slip into that. So you have to value your own input. What would you decide? If you were the only person you could confer with, what decision would you make? You have to just make the best decision you can in the time. You make the decision, you honor the time frame, you meet the deadline, and that will help you process through to get into stage 2, which is the actual decision. That's the moment of decision. This is the during. It's very quick because when you make a decision, it happens in an instant. It's literally instantaneously. It's a thought. The decision is a thought you make. Yes, we're doing this. No, we're not doing that. Here's what we're going to do. That happens in a minute. Now, the follow through is what comes after, but This is a very quick stage. The moment you make a decision, you don't need any more time or any more input or any more information. You just make the decision based on how aligned you feel to that decision. So the moment of decision is when you are ready. You're inspired into action. And guess what? You're never going to feel 100% ready, but you take that leap of faith. That is the moment of decision. This is very quick. And there's a difference between being unaligned and aligned. Aligned is when you do the work and you make that decision based on your own opinions, your own values, your own belief systems. And that even though you're a little hesitant of the consequences or what might happen, it still feels like the best decision that you can make. It feels true. It feels honest. It feels aligned. It feels really authentic for you. So the moment of decision is what happens the moment you decide, right? And then tips for stage 2, do not buy into the excuse that you need time to think about it. So many times when I'm on a call, like a consult call with a potential client, they'll say to me, I need time to think about it. But that's not true because decisions happen in a minute. And what I like to share with my clients is that successful people who feel empowered, who feel in control of their lives and in control of their careers, they make decisions, they get a little bit of information, they feel aligned with that decision. They don't just make it with their head, they make a decision that feels exciting and aligned and true for them. They make that decision quickly and then they don't look back. They commit to it fully, they go all in, and they don't judge their decision or question it or wish they'd done something else. They don't do this 2020 hindsight kind of a thing. They're like deciding, I'm all in, let's go for it. And from that moment on, you just keep making decisions from your future and versus like constantly looking back and feeling bad about the decisions that you made in retrospect. Less successful people tend to take a lot of time. They perseverate, they procrastinate, they avoid, they deflect, they abdicate the decision to somebody else. And they make decisions from an uneasy place. And so they end up changing their mind often. They're not like fully committed to the decision. They're not all in, which means after they've made the decision, they're never were committed to it. So they don't follow through. They don't own it. And that's when they feel like it's other people's fault. They feel like a victim of the decision, or they feel like somebody else should have made it, or whatever, right? So just notice that. Empowered leaders they take the information they have, they make a strong decision, and then they own that decision. Whatever comes after that decision, they own that they made the decision and they're going to adjust as they go, but they're not beating themselves up looking backwards or going backwards and rechanging and try to figure it out. That's just what gets you in a loop where you're just staying at the start line. You're never making progress. Okay, so the third stage is the after you've made the decision. So the first thing I like to tell my clients to do is be sure that you acknowledge your courage and your effort, and in that you made a decision. It's not easy. So many people spend their lives in indecision. They allow themselves not to have to make decisions because they think it's hard or it's uncomfortable. So they let other circumstances or other people make the decisions for them. That indecision that you're making by allowing yourself not to have to make decisions is a decision. You're deciding not to decide. Do you see that? But with that comes these feelings of I'm not in control of my life. This is happening to me, not with me or for me. I have no control. I have no say. I have no voice. I'm a victim of all of this. It's kind of the mentality that we go through versus owning that decision. And when you make a decision, I love to make sure my clients celebrate the decision because you have to stand in that. It feels good to make decision. Indecision feels terrible. Decision feels good. It feels like relief, right? It's like, that decision is done. I feel amazing. I'm going to move forward. And then you want to feel the empowerment of making that decision because what comes after that moment, you have to fully own it. So you have to look forward, not backward. And what I mean by fully owning the decision is that You make a decision, and then regardless of the outcomes, you stand by that decision in the sense that whatever comes your way, whatever outcomes, results that are a product of that decision, you take on. So for example, I use this in the podcast. I say, like, for example, if your superintendent says each site gets to decide what platform they're going to use as a primary communication tool for remote learning. Okay. And you're like, gosh, I wish the district would make the decision. I don't want to make this decision. I don't really know the right platform. I don't want to have to sit here and research. I don't have time for this. I'm just going to pick one and run with it, because what we really need to focus on is getting the lessons ready. That might be a chatter that's going on in your brain. So without really honoring the before process, you just swiftly make a decision because you don't like the discomfort of having to like go through the process of making the decision, which feels good in the moment because you check the box, you make the decision. But then later down the road, one of those outcomes might be like that platform doesn't work very well for some people, or it keeps crashing, or you need lots of customer support. And then your teachers are coming to you saying like, why did you pick this one? Or what was your reason behind this decision? Or I need help. And then you don't understand the platform. So now you're stuck having to figure it out while you're helping them. And it just feels really yucky and messy. Just notice that when we rush through our decisions, we're less likely to own them on the backside. We're like, and you blame the district. You think somebody else should have done it, or you blame the program that you chose. You're less likely to own the decision when you rush the before process. So own that before process while giving it a time limit and not just spinning an indecision. But then on the back end, you have to own that decision fully. So if you decide like we're going to use Zoom, that's it. That's our platform. You're going to want to get to know Zoom. You're going to want to research, how does Zoom work? What's the benefits? What's hard about it? Does it work for most kids, teachers? What's going on? Make that decision with your team, and then learn Zoom so that you can walk people through some basics. And even if you don't know the answers to everything, it's not your job to be the Zoom expert, but it is your job to own that decision. You might have to like have conversations about Zoom for the rest of the year, but you stand in that decision owning it. That's what that means, okay? So some tips for stage 3. You have to really like the reason behind your decision. So whatever decision you're making, do you like the reason why, right? If I talk about, going into the principalship, when you made a decision as a teacher that you wanted to pursue a principalship, you thought about why you wanted it. You aligned like, oh, it's going to feel so good. I'm going to have a lot of impact. I'm ready to move on. I want a new challenge. I want to, serve in a different way, whatever your reasons were. And then you align to those reasons. You're like, yeah, I like these reasons. It feels good to me. I know it's going to be hard, but I'm okay with that. That's being like liking the reason behind your decision and being aligned with it. And then once you make that decision, you fully own whatever comes your way as a principal. And you'll be like, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. It's not what I signed up for. You can feel like the victim of that decision, or you can be like, hey, guess what? I had no idea what I was signing up for, but I'm all in. I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to show up. I'm going to get the support I need, whatever it is you need to get through that first year, but fully own that you're the one who decided to go into school leadership. You see how that works? And then celebrate your decisions. It really does reinforce your belief in your own ability to make powerful, empowered decisions. And then finally, stay in forward motion. Seek evidence to prove that your decision was the right one, although we know that that's just our minds choosing to tell us that. But stay in forward motion. Look forward, don't look backward, and keep going and making evidence for yourself that your decision was the best one that you could have made at that time. And here's the thing. I'm not saying you never make a new decision, but I'm saying you don't go backwards and start from the start line again and remake the decision over and over again, because what's happening is you're just stagnating. You're not evolving yourself. Allow yourself to feel all of the effects of that decision until you'll hit a natural point at which it's time to make a new decision. So brand new principals, You got in this year, this isn't what you thought it was going to be, and now you're freaking out. Stand in this decision, like go through the process. If you need a mentor or coach, go through that together and feel the feels and continue making forward decisions. And then at the end of the year, you can reassess and say, is this the right job for me? Do I, you gave it your all, you made decisions, you own those decisions. You had some wins, you had some fails, you had some great days, and you had some really tough days. Now that you have this year's worth of, you know, practice, now what do you think? And maybe you'll still decide a new decision. I'm going to decide this isn't the career for me, or I'm going to go back to teaching, or I'm going to try something else. Or you might decide, like, nope, I've got a year under my belt. I have a little more confidence. I'm going forward. That's just an example of how you own your decision fully to the end, seeing it through until there's an opportunity to make a new decision. There's a difference between like undeciding and going backwards and then choosing a new decision. So, this is the anatomy of a decision. I hope it's been helpful in helping you show your brain how it goes through the decision making process and then breaking down what each step means for you. So, I'll see you on the next video. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.